Trigger warning: this video contains graphic descriptions of child abuse, neglect, torture, and the murder of a minor. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The content may be especially distressing for sensitive viewers, particularly survivors of abuse or those with young children. Please proceed with caution. In a world where children should be safe, cherished, and nurtured, some stories tear through the fabric of our shared humanity, exposing cruelty so profound that it forces a nation to stop, weep, and demand justice. This is one of those stories. His name was never made public. To protect his identity, the court called him Baby Daniel. He was just 3 years old. He should have been playing with toys, laughing in the sunshine, or being tucked in at night with a bedtime story. Instead, he suffered in silence. He was bruised, burned, beaten, behind the closed doors of a Johannesburg apartment at the hands of people who were meant to love him. For months, Baby Daniel endured unthinkable abuse. His tiny body bore the evidence: cracked ribs, burned wounds, bite marks, and bruises too numerous to count, until one day it became too much. His fragile body could no longer endure the violence inflicted on him. On that day, South Africa lost another innocent child to brutality. But this isn't just a story about a child's murder. It's a story about a system that failed him, a mother who looked away, a community that noticed the bruises but felt helpless, and a man, the mother's boyfriend, who would eventually be found guilty of murder, but not before leaving behind a trail of pain and outrage. In this video, we're going to walk through the heartbreaking and horrifying details of Baby Daniel's short life. We'll examine the abuse, the day of his death, the court trial that followed, and the national outcry that demanded reform in child protection. We do not tell this story to sensationalize pain, but to honor Baby Daniel's memory, to raise awareness, and to make sure that his suffering was not in vain. This is the true story of Baby Daniel. You are watching Once Upon a Crime, South Africa. Baby Daniel was born in 2013 in Johannesburg, South Africa. While we don't have exact records of his birthday or birth hospital, it is believed he was born into a lower-income working-class household. He was described as a quiet, bright-eyed little boy who had a sweet and gentle demeanor. From birth, Daniel lived with his biological mother, whose name was also withheld in court to protect the identities of other minor children in the family. She was a young woman, believed to be in her early 20s when she gave birth to him. His biological father was not part of his life, and was described by the mother in court testimony as absent and uninvolved. Daniel had at least 2 siblings, although it remains unclear whether they were from the same father. In an effort to rebuild her life, she entered into a relationship with another man, the one who would later be convicted of Daniel's murder. Initially, the boyfriend seemed like a responsible father figure. He moved in with the family and took on a disciplinary role in the household. But it didn't take long for his behavior to turn abusive. It was a cold winter's morning in Johannesburg when Baby Daniel took his final breaths. The flat he lived in and shared with his mother, siblings, and her boyfriend was quiet, too quiet for a home with young children, but behind those walls, a tragedy had already unfolded. On the morning of the 6th of June, 2016, the boyfriend who was later convicted of Daniel's murder reportedly began his day agitated and irritable. He was left alone with Baby Daniel and his siblings while the mother went out briefly. Testimonies revealed that Daniel had wet the bed again. For a child not yet 4 years old, this was completely normal. But in that toxic, violent household, it was considered a punishable offense. Witnesses and forensic specialists later said that Daniel was likely assaulted that morning. He was beaten and violently thrown against a hard surface, possibly a wall or the floor, causing massive internal trauma, including a head injury, fractured ribs, and a ruptured intestine. At some point during this assault, Daniel lost consciousness. Instead of rushing him to the hospital immediately, the boyfriend reportedly tried to revive him on his own. There are suggestions that he left the boy lying in the flat for several hours before alerting the mother. The mother later told the court that when she returned, Daniel was unresponsive and lying motionless on the bed. Instead of immediately calling an ambulance, the couple waited and debated what to do. Eventually, they put Daniel's limp body into a car and drove him to a nearby hospital. When baby Daniel arrived at the hospital, medical staff were horrified. He was not breathing. He had no pulse. His body was cold to the touch. The trauma team attempted CPR, but it was clear the child had been dead for some time. Doctors pronounced him dead on arrival. The medical examiner later described Daniel's body as a map of pain. The autopsy revealed a fatal blow to the head that caused internal bleeding, a ruptured intestine, which would have been excruciatingly painful, fractured ribs, second-degree burns, likely from boiling water healing injuries from previous assaults. These were not one-off injuries. This was systematic abuse. At first, the mother and boyfriend claimed Daniel had fallen into a hot bath. They said he hit his head on the tap and went unconscious, but doctors quickly realized this was a lie. The injuries didn't match. The burns were not splash marks, they were paw marks. The bruising and head trauma showed forceful impact, not an accident. The hospital contacted the police. The boyfriend was arrested that same day on suspicion of murder and child abuse. The mother was arrested soon after, charged with neglect and being an accessory to the crime. Police immediately launched an investigation into the home environment. The surviving children were removed from the flat and placed in protective custody. That cold Monday morning, South Africa lost another child to a cycle of violence, neglect, and silence. The day baby Daniel died was not a moment of random tragedy. It was the final act in a long series of abuses, a brutal crescendo that ended with a broken little body being rushed too late to a hospital that could no longer save him. His death shook a nation, but it was everything that happened before that day. The missed warnings, the silent witnesses, the unanswered cries that truly haunts us still. After the horrifying events of the 6th of June 2016, baby Daniel's story gripped the nation. News reports, radio talk shows, and social media were flooded with disbelief, sorrow, and rage. The brutal torture and murder of a 3-year-old child inside his own home wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a national failure. His death triggered waves of emotion, and when it came time to lay him to rest, the grief extended far beyond those who knew him. Baby Daniel's funeral took place in Johannesburg. He was buried in a small white coffin, a symbol of innocence, purity, and the unbearable cruelty of a life ended far too soon. The service was held quietly and privately, with only close family members, social workers, and select community members in attendance. Because the identities of his surviving siblings were protected by law, the funeral details were intentionally kept discreet, away from large media crowds. However, the image of that tiny white coffin would be etched in the memories of many South Africans. People who never knew baby Daniel came to the churchyard gates and stood in silence, some holding flowers, others in tears. His death had become a symbol of every child failed by those meant to protect them. In the weeks that followed his funeral, the public outrage was intense. Child protection organizations such as Women and Men Against Child Abuse, Childline SA, and Teddy Bear Clinic began demanding justice, not only for baby Daniel, but for the countless children in South Africa suffering in silence. The case reignited urgent conversations about the failures of the child welfare system, the lack of response from social workers to warning signs. Radio stations took live calls from parents sharing how they had tried to report abuse in their communities but had been ignored. Social workers called for more funding, training, and better crisis intervention. The hashtag number, Justice for Baby Daniel, trended across social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and even WhatsApp groups were filled with emotional posts, candle emojis, crying faces, and prayers for a boy no one could save in time. Some called for new laws, including the right for health professionals and teachers to bypass red tape and report abuse more swiftly. Others demanded that the mother be held equally accountable, arguing that standing by and doing nothing is as deadly as the violence itself. Many people donated to organizations protecting abused children in baby Daniel's name. Schools started hosting child protection awareness talks. Churches held candlelight vigils. Baby Daniel became a symbol of lost innocence, of silent suffering, and of the need for urgent change. At his funeral, one social worker was quoted saying, "This child should have been a superhero, a scientist, a soccer star, but instead he is another small coffin, lowered into the earth. How many more must follow before we act?" Baby Daniel's story didn't end with his funeral. It sparked a national reckoning. The pain of his death reverberated far beyond the church walls that held his final service. It forced South Africa to ask, are we truly protecting our children or only mourning them once it's too late? When baby Daniel's lifeless body arrived at the hospital on the 6th of June, 2016, with horrifying injuries and no signs of life, it was immediately clear to medical staff that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a fall in the bath. This was murder. The hospital staff contacted police the moment they examined baby Daniel's body. Medical professionals reported seeing extensive second-degree burns, some healing and some fresh, multiple bruises and lacerations in different stages of healing, a fractured skull, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. Bite marks, believed to be from an adult. A ruptured intestine, likely caused by being thrown or slammed against a hard surface. The Johannesburg Child Protection Unit was immediately dispatched, along with investigators from the South African Police Service, SAPS. At first, baby Daniel's mother and her boyfriend insisted that he had slipped and fallen into a hot bath, but their story didn't add up. The burn patterns on his body did not resemble a splash injury. They showed poor marks, suggesting that boiling water had been thrown onto him. The head injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma, not a fall. When confronted, the boyfriend grew evasive. Investigators later discovered WhatsApp messages between him and the mother, one in which the mother begged her boyfriend not to hurt Daniel again. Forensic experts searched the apartment and uncovered evidence of abuse. Belts, cords, and wooden spoons, likely used as weapons. A bathroom with boiling water stains and child-sized handprints on the walls, blood traces on furniture. A journal entry belonging to the mother describing how her boyfriend loses control sometimes and how Daniel was becoming a problem. The findings painted a horrifying picture of a home where torture had become routine. The trial began in a high court in Johannesburg, and it became one of the most heartbreaking and emotionally charged cases the country had seen. Judge Colin Machitsi presided over the trial. During the proceedings, the court heard testimony from doctors who described Daniel's injuries as the worst they had ever seen, statements from neighbors who heard screaming regularly from the flat, WhatsApp evidence where the mother acknowledged the abuse and did not report it, a chilling timeline of abuse that had gone on for months. Photos of Daniel's injuries, displayed during court, brought people including court officials to tears. The boyfriend claimed the injuries were accidental. He blamed the mother, but evidence showed that he had been the primary abuser, while the mother enabled the abuse by staying silent. The mother's defense tried to paint her as a victim of intimate partner violence, saying she was afraid to leave or intervene. However, the court concluded that while she may have feared her boyfriend, she still had ample opportunities to protect her child and chose not to. In 2019, the verdict was handed down. The boyfriend was found guilty of murder, child abuse, and neglect. He was sentenced to life in prison. The mother was found guilty of child abuse, neglect, and being an accessory to murder. She received a 20-year prison sentence. Judge Mashitse, in his closing remarks, said, "You were entrusted with the life of a child. Instead of nurturing him, you subjected him to pain, and in his time of need, you looked away. You failed him." The verdict was met with a mix of relief and sorrow. Child advocacy groups welcomed the life sentence for the boyfriend, but questioned whether 20 years for the mother was enough. On social media, the hashtag number Justice for Baby Daniel resurfaced. Many called for better oversight of at-risk households and more education about recognizing and reporting child abuse. The court's decision, while a step toward justice, could never undo the pain of what baby Daniel endured. The courtroom fell silent as the sentences were read, not just because of justice served, but because of what had been lost: a child, a future, a soul too fragile to defend itself. The trial ended, but the impact of Daniel's death still echoes in the hearts of every South African who followed his story, and in the renewed urgency to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Baby Daniel never got the chance to grow up. He never started school. He never celebrated his 4th birthday. His life, barely begun, was cut short by the very people who were supposed to protect him. While we may never know the full details of the first 3 years of Daniel's life, what we do know paints a picture of innocence stolen, pain ignored, and a system that failed to intervene in time. Baby Daniel didn't die in a war zone. He didn't die in an accident. He died in a place that should have been his sanctuary. He died with a broken body. But long before that, he lived with a broken spirit. Daniel was not failed by one person. He was failed by many. A mother who watched and stayed silent. A boyfriend who beat him like he was an enemy. Neighbors who suspected something but didn't press further. The system, too overwhelmed, too slow, too late. He was only 3 years old. We tell baby Daniel's story not just to mourn him, but to honor him, and to remind ourselves that child abuse hides in plain sight, sometimes behind apartment walls, sometimes in families we know, sometimes in the eyes of a quiet little boy who stops smiling. Let his story be more than a headline. Let it be a call to action. Speak up when you see the signs. Report what makes you uneasy. Be the person who says something before the silence becomes permanent, because somewhere, right now, there's another child enduring what Daniel did, and they're hoping, praying that someone, anyone, will save them. Baby Daniel's voice was stolen. Let ours speak for him. Rest in peace, little one. You mattered. You were loved, even by strangers, and we'll never forget you.